Every spring I come back to this park. Same path, same bench, same patch of sun, if the weather is kind enough to give it to me. And every year I come here for the same reason, to remember my two best friends. I am 78 years old. I am a Vietnam veteran. And out of the three boys who once swore we would stick together no matter what happened, I am the only one still here to say their names out loud. That does something to a man. Not all at once, not in a dramatic way, just a quiet weight you learn to carry. There used to be three of us, three boys from the same town, three boys who thought we knew what the world was, three boys who had not lived long enough to understand what a decision could cost. We grew up together, ran the same streets, skipped rocks in the same creek, got in trouble in the same places, stood outside the same grocery store talking about what kind of men we were going to be one day, like boys do when they still think life is something you can plan if you talk about it hard enough. One of them was Tommy. Tommy was white, same as me, loud, quick with a joke, the kind of boy who could get punched in the mouth on a Friday and still be back joking with the same guy by Sunday. The other was Reggie. Reggie was black, calmer than both of us, smarter too, if I am being honest. He was the kind who listened all the way through before he spoke, and when he did speak, it usually turned out he had already understood the thing the rest of us were still trying to figure out. Me, I was somewhere in the middle. Not the loudest, not the smartest. Just one more young fool with a decent arm, a fast mouth when I got comfortable, and the kind of courage that mostly comes from not yet knowing enough to be afraid. I remember one summer Tommy stole a watermelon from old man Garrett's farm, not because he was hungry, because he wanted to see if he could. We ran like idiots with that thing, me looking over my shoulder, Tommy laughing so hard he could barely carry his end, Reggie behind us saying we were both fools, and he wanted that clearly on the record. By the time we got to the creek and cracked it open, the thing was still half white inside, not ripe at all. We sat there spitting out hard pieces, and Tommy said, "Well, at least we'll remember it." He was right. That is the part that gets me now. He was right. We were close from the beginning, not in some storybook way, in the real way, the hard way. The kind where people know what your father is like, what kind of trouble your brother got into, what your mother says when she is mad, and whether you are the type to run or stay when things get hard. We knew all that about each other. And then Vietnam came into our lives the way big things do when you are young. First as a word, then as a headline, then as an argument, then as something real enough to stand in front of. And this is the part that matters. Nobody forced us. We signed up, the three of us, volunteers. That is the truth. People ask if I regret going. I do not know how to answer that. We chose to go. Nobody forced us. But we were boys choosing something we did not understand. Is that a choice? Or just youth pretending to be wisdom? We did not think of ourselves as boys, of course. We thought we were men already. That is what being young does. It gives you confidence before it gives you sense. I remember the three of us talking about it like it was the next big thing in our lives, not because we wanted blood, not because we hated anybody we had never met. No. It was simpler than that, and because it was simpler, it was more dangerous. We thought it meant something. We thought we were stepping into history. We thought we were proving ourselves. We thought one day we would come back and people would look at us and know we had done a hard thing. What we did not know was that hard things do not end just because you survive them. They follow. They settle. They change shape. We signed up together, but we did not stay together. That is one of the cruel little truths of life. You make a big choice, shoulder to shoulder with the people you love, and then the world scatters you anyway. Different units, different places, different roads once we got there. I still remember the day we realized it. We had all this big talk in us, all this brotherhood, all this nonsense about how we were going to watch out for one another the whole way through. Then some man with a clipboard and a flat voice broke us apart in less than 5 minutes. That is how fast life can do it. One name here, one name there, one bus, another bus, a handshake if you're lucky, a joke if somebody is still feeling brave enough to make one. Tommy laughed that day. Of course he did. He said something like, "Well, if either of you idiots gets famous, don't forget I knew you before you got ugly." That was Tommy, always finding one more joke to throw into the dark. Reggie just looked at the two of us and said, "Come home." Not fight hard, not be brave, not make us proud. Just come home. I think about that sometimes. How the smartest thing said that whole day came from the only one of us who was not trying to sound tough. Tommy died over there. Ambush, they said. Quick, they said. Whew, like that was supposed to make it easier. I was not with him when it happened. That bothered me for a long time. I got the news in a tent, not from a friend, not from a chaplain, just a typed notice in a man's hand. I remember staring at his name on that paper and thinking, this is how the world tells you your friend is gone? A sheet of paper, a few clipped words, no room on it for his laugh, no room for the watermelon, no room for the boy he had been before anybody handed him a rifle. Just Tommy, reduced to official language. There are moments in life when your age leaves you. That was one of them. One day you are young enough to think your story is only beginning. Then a friend dies, and suddenly part of you becomes old before the rest of your body is caught up. Reggie made it home. So did I. That should have been the good ending. 2 out of 3. 2 boys back from hell with enough life in front of them to make something of it. And for a little while, maybe it was. We came home older than we were supposed to be, but alive. That matters. It always matters. Reggie married. I married. He found work. I found work. We both tried to become regular men again. That is what a lot of people do not understand. After something like that, nobody really teaches you how to return. They just sort of expect it. You put on clean clothes, you get a job, you shake hands, you stand in your kitchen, you smile for pictures, you nod when people ask if you are doing all right. And little by little, everybody around you decides that because you are home, you must also be fine. But home and fine are not the same thing. Reggie carried more than he ever liked to say. That was his way. He was never the kind to make a speech out of his pain. Even as a boy, he held things close. As a man, he held them even closer. We would meet sometimes, get coffee, stand around somewhere and talk the way men talk when they are trying to touch something serious without putting their whole hand on it. He would ask about work, ask about my wife, ask about my son. I would ask about his health now and then, because I could already see he was not as strong as he should have been. He brushed it off for a while. Men do that too. We joke, we minimize. We say things like, "I'm all right," while our bodies are already writing a different story. The last time I saw Reggie, he was in a hospital bed. Thin, too thin. The kind of thin that makes a man look like he is already halfway gone. But he smiled when I walked in. That was Reggie, sick as a dog and still trying to make the other fellow comfortable. We did not talk about anything grand. The weather, my son, the lousy food, some half-dead joke about how hospital coffee could probably strip paint off a truck. That joke still gets me. He was tired, I could see that. And before I left, he looked at me and said, "You remember Tommy?" I said, "Of course I do." He said, "Good, somebody should." That was the last thing he ever said to me. Reggie died in his 40s. Natural causes, they called it. Maybe that was true on paper, but I have lived too long to believe life is always so clean. Sometimes a man dies in a hospital bed, and the paperwork says one thing, while the years behind his eyes say another. I do not know what parts of that war stayed in his body. I do not know what part was stress, what part was exhaustion, what part was just bad luck coming for a good man early. I only know he should have had more time. That is all. He should have had more time. So now it is me. Every spring, same park, same bench, same two names in my mind. Tommy, Reggie. Some years I say them out loud. Some years I do not. Depends on the day. Depends on how the air feels. Depends on whether memory arrives gently or all at once. There was one year I did not come here. My wife asked why. I told her I was busy. That was a lie. The truth was I was angry. Angry at Tommy for dying. Angry at Reggie for leaving. Angry at myself for still being here to carry both of them. That year I drank too much, slept too little, snapped at my son over nothing. My wife sat me down one night and said, "You can be mad at the world, or you can be part of this family, but you can't do both forever." She was right. She usually is when it matters. So the next spring I came back, and I have come back every year since. I come here because it keeps me honest. That may sound strange, but it is true. A memorial has a way of stripping a man down to what matters. You sit there long enough and all the usual noise of life starts to fall away. Bills, politics, news, the little nonsense people let fill up their days. And what is left is simpler. Who was here? Who is gone? Who still remembers? My wife's name is Dorothy. She does not come here with me. This is not her grief to carry. But every year, the night before I come, she makes sure my jacket is clean. She does not say why. She does not have to. I do not come here because my life turned out bad. That is another part of the story. Mine did not. Not in the end. I had my years of anger, my years of bad sleep, my years of coming home from work too tense, too tired, too quick to go quiet. I was not always an easy man. Ask Dorothy and she would tell you that with a look before she ever used words. But I got lucky where luck matters most. I married a woman with more patience than I probably deserved. Not endless patience, nobody has that, but enough. enough honesty, enough steadiness, enough courage to call me out when I was slipping into myself too far. We built a life, a real one, a wife, a son, a house in the suburbs, a lawn to cut, college tuition to worry over, the regular holy clutter of being alive with other people. It was good. And because it was good, I do not take it lightly. That is part of why I come here too, because I know two men who never got what I got. Tommy never got to come home and age badly in a recliner, never got to complain about cholesterol or the price of decent tires. Reggie never got to watch his own hair turn gray, never got to stand in a backyard with a paper plate at a family barbecue and tell some story he had already told twice before. I got those things. You can call them ordinary if you want. At my age, I call them riches. My son went to college. I still smile when I say that. Not because college fixes a life, it does not, but because I remember the day we dropped him off. Dorothy trying not to fuss too much, me pretending I was not emotional about it, because men of my generation like to act as if tears are some kind of personal insult. He was carrying boxes, talking fast, half excited, half pretending not to be nervous. And I remember standing there thinking, Tommy should have had a son old enough for college. Reggie should have had this kind of morning. They should have had a chance to get old enough to worry about parking on campus and tuition and all the normal headaches of an ordinary life. That is one of the hardest parts of surviving. People think survivor's guilt is all about the battlefield. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it is about much smaller things. A graduation, a wedding, a grandchild, a spring morning, a bench in a park. You find yourself standing in the middle of some ordinary blessing, and suddenly the whole thing hurts a little because someone else should have been here for it too. I do not let that ruin the blessing. I learned not to do that. That took time. If you spend all your years apologizing for still being alive, you do not honor the dead. You just waste the life they no longer have. That is something age taught me. Not at 20, not at 30, maybe not even at 50, but eventually. The dead do not need us to die in slow motion for them. They need remembering. And maybe they need us to live in a way that proves their absence still means something. That is how I try to think of it. Not always perfectly. Some years I come here and feel peaceful. Some years I come here and feel angry all over again. Angry at youth. Angry at war. Angry at how easy it was for 3 boys to make a decision they had no real ability to understand. And then some years I sit here and just feel grateful. Grateful for memory. Grateful I can still walk to this bench under my own power. Grateful I can still say their names without looking down at a stone to remind myself. There is a kind of dignity in that. A kind of duty, too. I have known men who let grief hollow them out. I have known men who made bitterness into a home and lived there the rest of their lives. I have known men who stayed standing but stopped really loving anybody because they thought losing people had already taught them all they needed to know. I understand all of that. I do not judge it quickly. But I also know this. A man can carry sorrow without letting it become his only language. That took me years to learn. My wife helped. So did my son. So did work. So did age. Age gets mocked by the young because they think it only takes bad knees, slow mornings, a suspicious relationship with stares, and sure, there is some of that. But age also gives perspective if you are willing to sit still long enough to let it. At this age, I do not need to prove I was brave. I do not need to polish the past into something noble. And I do not need to make myself the hero of a story that belongs to 3 boys more than one old man. I was one of 3. That is how I think of it, not the main one, not the best one, just the one left to talk. And maybe that is why I come here every spring, because memory deserves a place, not just inside the mind where it can get crowded and confused, a place in the world, a bench, a path, a tree moving in the wind, some sun on the grass, the sound of people living nearby without knowing the whole history of the man sitting 10 yards away. I like that part. Children run through this park. Dogs pull at leashes. Couples walk past talking about groceries or dinner or some neighbor I have never met. Life keeps moving around memory. That feels right to me, because that is the truth of it. Tommy is gone, Reggie is gone, and still the world keeps making spring. The trees come back, the light changes, the air softens, and somehow that does not insult the dead, it honors them. It says life continues. It says your names are gone from most mouths, but not all of them. It says somebody is still here, sitting in the sun, remembering the boys you were before the world got hold of you. Sometimes I try to picture us as we were before any of it. 3 boys, no uniforms, no headlines, no fear dressed up as duty, just the creek, the road, the sound of Tommy laughing too loud, Reggie rolling his eyes at both of us like he already knew we were going to be trouble. That is how I like to leave them in my mind when I stand up to go home. Not as symbols, not as casualties, not as lessons, as boys, as my friends, as the 2 people who knew me before war, before marriage, before fatherhood, before age turned my face into my father's and my hands into proof that time always wins in the end. I think that matters too. To remember people whole, not just by how they died, not just by what took them, by who they were when they were alive. Tommy with his jokes, Reggie with that quiet look that made you feel like you had better think before you spoke. And me, still here, still walking into another spring, still trying to live in a way that would not embarrass the boys I started with. I do not know if I always succeed. I know I have been blessed more than I earned. That much is true. A good wife, a son I am proud of, a decent house in the suburbs, years enough to become an old man on a bench instead of a name somebody else has to say once a year. That is not nothing. That is almost everything. So I come here, I sit, I remember, and after a while I get up and go back to the life I was lucky enough to have. I go home to Dorothy. I call my son if I have a reason, and sometimes even when I do not. I drink my coffee. I mow my lawn too slow. I complain about my shoulder when the weather changes. I live the ordinary life 2 other boys never got. And I try not to do that carelessly. Because if being the last one means anything, I think it means this. You do not waste what the others lost. You do not turn memory into theater. You do not turn grief into vanity. And you do not spend your whole life asking why you stayed, if the only answer you are willing to accept is one that makes you special. Maybe there is no grand answer. Maybe there is only this: I am here, they are not. I remember them, and I live carefully with that fact. At my age, that feels like enough truth for one man. So yes, every spring I come back to this park. Same path, same bench, same two names. And as long as I can still make the walk, they will not be entirely gone. Not to me. Not while I am here.